As we start our program today, I'd like to introduce my friend and fellow activist, Erickka Patmore. Erickka is a freelance artist with a Bachelor in Fine Arts from the University of Regina, and her activism often finds a way into her surreal, colorful paintings. Erickka grew up on a cattle farm in Manitoba and always felt a strong connection to animals, but not in the same way as her family. Despite being raised in an environment that tried to convince her eating animals was okay, she went vegetarian as a teenager and eventually vegan as an adult, turning her experiences with farm animals into fuel for her activism. All animals deserve love. So Erickka is going to start off this event by sharing her personal definition of veganism.
Hello everyone. My name is Erickka. Thank you very, very much for having me at this event. I have a pretty short and sweet definition of veganism, but I think it's always good to start with what veganism means. So, veganism is the choice to remove animal products and byproducts from one's lifestyle to the best of their ability. The term veganism generally emphasizes the liberation of animals and the promotion of animal rights. However, there are many reasons for practicing veganism, including positive health effects and positive impact on the environment. Thank you. So good afternoon. In case you weren't here before, my name is Erickka. I use she, they pronouns, and I grew up on a small farm in Manitoba. So I love my family, but I grew up surrounded by a bit of a paradox. My family farms grain, and they also farm cattle. So, I didn't exactly tell them I was going to be speaking at VegFest Saskatoon, to say the least. I could tell endless tales about how I, someone from a small, free-range, generally positive-sounding farm, went vegetarian and then vegan, but I'd like to focus on something in particular today. Today I want to speak to you about my experiences in my local 4-H beef club, and how those experiences not only helped me realize the absolute absurdity of eating animals, but also fueled my activism and outreach to this very day. Firstly, for those who don't know what 4-H beef is, I'm sorry that I have to tell you. 4-H beef is a sort of non-profit club with chapters all around rural Canada. There are many different branches of 4-H, but unfortunately, I was put into the 4-H beef program when I was little with zero say in the matter. In 4-H beef, you learn about cattle. On top of monthly meetings, which require attendance, you actually get to pick a calf from your family farm, name them, and become their friend for a few months. Starting your first couple years in the junior program, I'm talking like 5 or 6 years old, like not very old, you start with calves, just little babies. You slowly halter break them and train them to become a show animal. And now while this is going on, that's like your homework in the background. You go to these monthly meetings, and they encourage you to think about the cattle industry from a very polished perspective, to say the least. At the end of the 4-H season, usually each June, and after you've trained your steer or heifer to be the best show animal they can be, something called a 4-H achievement is held. All members show off their cattle and how well behaved they are, essentially. And once you're out of the junior program and you start showing fully grown steers instead of calves, the 4-H achievement is followed by a show and sale in another larger town. Every year, you're required to go to the show with your steer to show him in a ring one last time, surrounded by bidders, and unable to prevent sending that animal to their death. My parents always liked to justify it with the large amount of money I would receive that they would put towards my university. This cycle repeated for me for nearly a decade, from when I started in the junior program at about 6 to when I was 15 or so, and finally inadvertently caused my family to quit. I'll tell you a little bit about that story today, the highlights of what I went through, and how it put me on the path to respecting animals for who they are and not what they can provide for people. So, being raised on a cattle farm, I've always been taught that meat is a necessity of each meal, and that the animals really, really don't mind being killed, or at least that they're killed humanely, whatever that means. Basically, I was raised with this double-think concept of, it's okay to eat animals like cows if you love them. Why are you even questioning that? They don't really don't mind. I still remember how deeply I connected with the first calf that was brought to me to be my 4-H calf when I was little. Yet I always dreaded working with every single animal through this entire experience. I like to think my subconscious always knew that something was deeply wrong with what I was doing, but I loved animals so much, and there was no way I could ever stand up to my parents and express this. I still remember that feeling of betraying them, even when I was in the junior program, and wasn't even to the point where I was forced to send them to the highest bidder yet. However, eventually I did end up graduating to the regular program, and a year of my life would usually mean about 4 or 5 months of getting to know a steer chosen by my parents, starting with brushing them and connecting with them enough to start to see their personalities and mannerisms, and ending with a puddle of tears every year as I had to fight the horrible shaking feeling in my stomach and say goodbye to the friend I had made, never being able to leave that feeling of betrayal behind. I knew I had a particular connection with animals, but it was baffling to me that no one, at least to my perception, could pick up on the obvious sentience of these creatures and realize that this was not what they wanted. Still, even when I turned 14 and I just couldn't be someone that ate meat anymore, subjecting myself to involuntary fights about my nutritional intake for months, I was still forced to participate in this program. Of course, this ostracized the shit out of me at meetings and within the program in general. I would take my beef on a bun without the beef, but even when I was trying to be as quiet as possible, people gave me glares and made it very clear to me that I was looked at as quite the weirdo. The adults were more upfront about this than the members my age, but I could still tell I caused quite the disruption within the club. I still think about my peers struggling with their fully grown 1,500-pound steers. I still think about my peers snuggling with their fully grown 1,500-pound steers right before selling them off and taking the check for it. And something deep inside me knew that they, at least to some extent, had to fight the same mental battle that I did every year. Of course, they still disliked me anyways, and each month the club became more and more of a drag than it was when I initially began. And trust me, I never wanted to do it to begin with. And one day, though, my family simply told me that we were not doing 4-H anymore. It was weird because I was the oldest kid and was still a few years away from aging out of the program, and there was still my younger brothers that had more years left than me. I was never given a for sure reason, but I have a feeling it definitely had something to do with me. I know I complained about it, but my best guess is that either my parents were hearing more from the adults than I was, or they didn't want to see me bullied, no matter how much it promoted their little livelihood of farming cattle. I really like to hope that it's a little bit of both. I still think about my 4-H animals to this day, even though I've forgotten their names. I felt so horrible for abandoning them, and I'm so happy to have been shown firsthand how wonderful, smart, individualistic, and loving cattle are, even if it had such a horrible implication. I hope that you guys take away, if nothing else, the fact that you do not need to have a strong bond with an animal to recognize that sentience and individuality. Take it from me, an ex-farm kid, firsthand. I know I'm not the only one that had conflicting thoughts in that club, and I hope to turn my negative experience into a positive one by continuing to fight for the liberation of animals. They are sweet, beautiful souls who do not deserve the hell on earth that humans give them, and I'll continue to help them for as long as I possibly can. Thank you.